Greetings, I'm John Spirit.
I'm Merch Ezekiel.
Plastic is so plastic, and welcome to Greg Supershorts. It's Kanthal time. Now that we've got so much power forever and ever, we don't have to stress about powering this blast furnace with MV steam turbine generators without enough steam. We can just use our diesel, and that's why we made 4 diesel generators. However, we also do need to set up MV energy hatches. To make the MV energy hatch, you need a couple new things. One of them is the ULPIC chip, which we can make now that we have ULPIC wafers, which came from our blue sapphire lenses, on our tasty silicon wafers. The other thing is the medium voltage coil, which is just fine aluminum wire, but you do need an MV assembler. Thanks to the combination of quest rewards and foresight, we were able to make the MV assembler instantly from items in the system. Which was really funny when Arch told me that the assembler was done the moment I was like, can I help with the assembler? Thankfully, none of the other ingredients in this process secretly need MV. If I had to make an MV polarizer for some godforsaken reason, I would scream. Okay, we've attached the advanced combustion generators to our blast furnace with our newfound MV energy hatches, and they are running it at a speed. That's pretty good. We're making aluminum. This is way faster than before. Now that we have HV power for our blast furnace, we can make hot Kanthal ingots. Kanthal is used for Kanthal coils, which are an upgrade to many multi-blocks that either increase their speed, or in the case of the blast furnace, increase the temperature that you can run recipes at, which is important for some things like, for example, hot silicon ingots, which require 2273 Kelvin, which is not, by the way, 1900. To cool down those hot Kanthal ingots, we're going to need an MV chemical bath. Until we have the correct voltage tier to get the vacuum freezer, we need to use chemical baths to cool down our ingots. Thankfully, they are annoyingly slow. Brief detour from the Kanthal, I just made an advanced centrifuge because God hates me. The advanced centrifuge will make glue faster. It'll centrifuge glue in 10 seconds instead of 20 seconds, which is still shitty, but it's okay. Anyway, to make Kanthal dust, you need chromium dust, aluminium dust, and iron dust in a mixer. I believe we've told you about chromium dust before, but just as a reminder, we electrolyzed chromite. Thankfully, it gives iron dust too, which is part of the recipe. Once you have your hot Kanthal ingots, you can die quickly while I run to this advanced chemical plant. Sorry, chemical bath, and it will run very slowly and make you your Kanthal ingots, which we need so many of. We have been waiting a cool 5 million years, but our Kanthal might finally be enough for the new coils for the new blast furnace. Each of the 16 Kanthal coil blocks requires 8 Kanthal, and every Kanthal ingot takes 30 seconds to smelt the electric blast furnace, so this took forever. But we have now replaced all our coils, not that it looks any different, but the temperature is higher. When it's off, it's blue. In this monstrosity of a setup, we made our next progression step. Polyethylene and polyvinyl chloride. Both of these two liquids require, at base, ethylene. But there are many more nightmares here than I am letting on. And there are so many laser nodes from Laser I.O., so this will be a Laser I.O. lesson as well. Let's just talk about the process first. To make ethylene, you need ethanol and sulfuric acid. Before we talk about the ethanol, let's talk about the sulfuric acid. Sulfuric acid can be made in a chemical reactor with water and sulfur trioxide, which comes from sulfur dioxide and oxygen gas, which comes from oxygen gas and sulfur. So here we have a chemical reactor, and then another chemical reactor making sulfur trioxide, and then one that makes the sulfur dioxide in the first place. These are all LV, so they're hooked up to a cute little tin cable that slides behind this stuff, in this very dense build. To get the sulfur dust, we're using an item card from Laser I.O., which just accepts sulfur on channel 4, a channel we specifically picked out for sulfur because we're not very foresighted. To get the sulfur, we are exporting it from the low-pressure steam furnace, which makes sulfur for rubber. Another thing we need to do is supply oxygen, so we are using a fluid card in stocking mode. Stocking mode is a mode that's different from extract and insert. When you use a stocking mode, the card acts as if it's trying to extract items from the rest of the network. In this case, we're trying to extract oxygen from the network of laser nut nodes on channel 0. Stock mode only pulls from inventories or tanks that are attached to a fluid card which is set to insert naively. We could put a filter in here to ensure that only oxygen is inserted, But since this is on channel 0 and set to insert, stock mode can see this tank as something it can pull out of. That's how oxygen gets in this chemical reactor. What about this chemical reactor, which needs a certain amount of oxygen and sulfur dioxide? The last thing we want is for all 3 boxes to fill up with oxygen, and then have no space for sulfur dioxide. Thankfully, stocking mode and a counting filter come to the rescue here. As usual, it'll search the network for any inserts which have the fluid you want. For example, on the downside, we have an inserter with a basic filter for sulfur dioxide, so that the system on channel 0 knows there's a tank with sulfur dioxide in it that stockers can use. So it searches the network for sulfur dioxide and oxygen, and then it only allows 2 buckets each of sulfur dioxide and oxygen gas in. More accurately, it pulls up to that amount. This poses a potential issue. If this down card that inserts sulfur dioxide is set to insert, won't it randomly decide to put sulfur dioxide into this chemical reactor? Wouldn't that be bad? We think it would be. So we have chosen to make channel 0 a channel in which there are no extracts anywhere. There are only inserts and stocks. This means that no laser node on the network will be aggressively trying to extract its fluids and put it into something which can take them. There will only be tanks on the network which are set to insert so that stock can pull out of them and shove into the machine it wants to. Anyway, that's how we get sulfur dioxide and oxygen into this basic chemical reactor. We have something similar for the one using sulfur trioxide and water. The basic water generator is set to insert, and so is the chemical reactor to the north, neither with a filter. But on the down, we have a stalker which uses water and sulfur trioxide. We dump the sulfuric acid directly into this super tank, which fills with sulfuric acid, and is probably good to have. We use a laser node that has an extract, actually, on a special channel 4 to pull the sulfuric acid into both of these chemical reactors. You can use counting filters on insert mode with extracts in the system. It's just really weirdly finicky, and it fucked with us for a long time. So we only have extract and inserts with counting filters in one area, channel 4, which delivers sulfuric acid and ethanol, which I'll talk about, into these 2 chemical reactors. That's why the fluid tank connected to the super tank is set to extract. Notably, the recipe that turns ethanol into ethylene makes diluted sulfuric acid, and you can get 2/3 of your sulfuric acid back in a basic distillery. Which means that sulfuric acid has to go somewhere, like this super tank. But Jonathan, you may be asking, what if the sulfuric acid maker keeps filling the super tank until the distillery that makes excess sulfuric acid can no longer work? Then won't the diluted sulfuric acid clog up, and these 2 chemical reactors will clog up, and everything will break, and everything will be sad, and it'll all break forever? Stop panicking. I have attached to this super tank a fluid detector, which measures the amount of fluid in this tank as a fraction of the total fluid they can hold, which in the case of a super tank is a really ginormous amount, and emits that fraction as a fraction of the redstone signal 15. Right now, it isn't exporting any redstone signal at all. It's just nowhere near enough to count as even 1 redstone signal. But once it does count as 1 redstone signal, the machine controller I have attached to this chemical reactor making sulfuric acid will turn off the machine. The machine controller requires a signal weaker than the set redstone level, which in this case is 1, in order to run. So if this super tank ever exports a redstone signal, please God, one day, then this chemical reactor will turn off, and the diluted sulfuric acid distillery will take charge. Anyway, that's how we get the sulfuric acid. Let's talk about the ethanol now. Ethanol comes from biomass in a distillery. It also makes wood pulp, which we are trashing. To get the biomass, we are using a pyrolysis oven, a multi-block which does a variety of things, including making coke and charcoal, but it also turns biochaff, which comes from plant balls, into biomass at a better rate than the recipe where the brewery turns biochaff into biomass. It is more efficient in the pyrolysis oven. To get the biochaff, we are macerating plant balls. To get the plant balls, we are compressing saplings. To get the saplings, we are pulling saplings out of the random sapling generator, a block added by this mod pack. We have a conveyor here which pulls out into the item pipe and shoves items into the basic compressor. Unfortunately, I didn't realize when I was setting up this system that although the plant ball makes a lot of biochaff, it only does so if you have a higher tier macerator, which we do not. As an aside, currently, Arch is making a bunch of basic integrated circuits, the second LV circuit. Why? I will not tell you. But they require IC chips, which you can get from ILC wafers, which you get from silicon wafers and ruby lenses. And also, like, diodes. Anyway, so we now have the ethanol coming from this distillery and going into these chemical reactors so they can make ethylene. Both the ethylene and diluted sulfuric acid are pulled out on the black channel, channel 15. Channel 15 is dedicated to filtered extracts and imports. Inserting into this steel drum, which now holds ethylene, we have a fluid card on channel 15 with a filter on ethylene. So ethylene all goes into this steel drum. The diluted sulfuric acid that goes into this basic distillery also comes through the black channel. Now you may be asking, where does this ethylene go? It goes into this basic chemical reactor, which uses a fluid regulator to ensure that keep exact 144 ethylene is put into this reactor. We don't need a filter, we realized. Previously, we were concerned that if a chemical reactor had other fluids in it, then the fluid regulator would see those fluids, think, there's already 144 fluid in here, and never try to put any fluids. It now seems to work on a fluid-by-fluid basis. If there's ethylene in here, it'll put 144 ethylene into this basic chemical reactor, regardless of whether there's already oxygen in it. The ethylene also goes into this basic chemical reactor. I want you to know that the number of times I said basic chemical reactor on this recording and then deleted it has been so many that this time I am letting you see my fuck-up. Anyway, ethylene goes into this basic chemical reactor. So does chlorine gas. We are getting chlorine gas by electrolyzing salt into sodium, which I have forgotten to void. Okay, we're now shoving sodium dust into this super chest, which will have item voiding enabled. Salt turns into chlorine and sodium in a basic electrolyzer. We can get salt by macerating salt crystals, which we get from smelting N salt ore, which we're getting from our friend the simple ore generator. We use a bronze drum as a buffer, so that this fluid regulator can make sure that only 2000 chlorine goes into the chemical reactor. That chemical reactor then exports its vinyl chloride into this bronze drum. It also makes hydrochloric acid, a useful object. Hydrochloric acid is currently being used by Arch to make iron 3 chloride, which makes phenolic printed circuit boards cheaper, which Arch is using for good integrated circuits, which are made from basic integrated circuits. Why could Arch be making good integrated circuits? Vinyl chloride and oxygen make polyvinyl chloride, which is not useful precisely at the moment, but eventually it'll allow us to make polyvinyl chloride sheets, which we can use to make plastic circuit boards for the plastic printed circuit board for the top tier LV circuit. The polyethylene is the more important liquid right now. We can make diodes maximally efficiently for our gallium arsenide if we use liquid polyethylene with silicon wafers. Since silicon wafers are cut from silicon boules, which on their own use only one small pile of gallium arsenide dust, you don't need to waste oodles of gallium arsenide. And that's that. That's our crazy system, which took an enormous amount of energy from our brains to build. I guess I should mention that we're powering it with MV power that comes from steam, that comes from a laser node. And we have 2 low voltage transformers here to make sure that sufficient LV power gets to all these machines when they're running at the same time, because we didn't use a battery buffer for this. Batteries are just a teensy bit annoying to make, just a little bit. Alright, fine. I'll tell you why Arch is making good integrated circuits. Good integrated circuits, which require nothing more special than the diodes and the basic integrated circuits, are used to make our first HV circuits. HV circuits require some of these chips, which we've been making using our various lenses. The only clever bit is the transistors. Transistors require polyethylene and fine tin wire, but they also require silicon plates. Silicon ingots are chemical baths from hot silicon ingots, which you can get in an electric blast furnace from silicon dust. And we are getting just so much silicon from our process that we set up earlier, which turns cobble into flint, into silicon dioxide, into oxygen. How convenient that a process designed to give us oxygen also gives us lots of silicon. Of course, it may be that we actually designed this for silicon primarily because we needed the silicon boules, and I'm just dumb. But yes, that is how you obtain advanced integrated circuits. Right now, Arch is crafting up the good integrated circuits. But before we get to that final moment, let me tell you what else you can do with polyethylene. Polyethylene allows us to construct machine holes without using the wrought iron. You need every ingredient except the wrought iron, so it's not an enormous benefit, but it is at least slightly better. One thing you may notice in many of these recipes is that polyethylene seems to typically be in multiples of 144 millibuckets, which is an ingot's worth of polyethylene. This is a little bit of a problem when your primary method of storing polyethylene is as a liquid. How are you going to collect 144 millibuckets? At some point, we plan to do something similar to what we did with the liquid rubber here, put a fluid solidifier next to it making sheets, and then just fluid extract them whenever we need it in the precise amounts. Unfortunately, that's my job, and I'm so tired and sleepy. So I'm just letting you know that we're going to do that eventually. At last, we are making our first HV circuit. We can make so much stuff with this baby, including the advanced circuit assembler, which, besides letting us make circuits faster, will also allow us to make the next tier LV circuit. The final tier, in fact. My favorite part about the advanced circuit assembler is how it looks identical to the advanced assembler. It really makes them easy to distinguish. Anyway, that's it for today's episode. As always, if you have any feedback, we'd love to hear it. We hope you enjoyed!